When you're standing on a glorified coffee can hurtling through the cold, indifferent void of space, perspective becomes your best friend, or your worst enemy. Mira Kess had always leaned towards the latter. Today, she was scheduled to exhibit her latest controversy disguised as art to the Xel'Naga, and she had a feeling it wasn't going to end with a round of polite applause and hors d'oeuvres. She stood on the platform of Ascendia's apex, the topmost point of the massive space elevator that was both the pride and bane of human achievement. At least it didn't smell like the rest of Ascendia, Mira thought. Here, the antiseptic air felt almost clean, far removed from the sigh or tang of desperation that clung to the city below like an unwelcome social disease. Of course, it had its own stink. The stink of political intrigue and the suffocating arrogance of the Xel'Naga. Mira couldn't decide which was worse, the stink of people or the stink of power. She adjusted her beret, tugged her jacket tighter around her frame, and glanced at the massive, glistening cube that housed her latest piece of artistic defiance. The last laugh she'd called it seemed appropriate considering. "You ready to be declared a public enemy?" came a voice behind her. Mira turned to see her friend and reluctant accomplice, Jax. He was tall, lean, and had the perpetual look of someone who'd just been accused of farting in an elevator, unjustly, but everyone knew the truth. "Ready as I'll ever be," Mira replied, the corner of her mouth twitching into a half-smile. "Think they'll bring the pitchforks or the disintegrator rays? Hard to say. I hear the Xel'Naga are fond of overkill. So both, probably." Jax shrugged, hands stuffed in the pockets of his torn bomber jacket. "You know, I always thought they'd just ban alcohol first. Surprised they're going after art." "Alcohol might have been a kinder start," Mira mused. "But then they'd have to ban artists, and where's the fun in that?" As if on cue, a group of Xel'Naga emerged from the elevator's streamlined doors, their elongated forms cloaked in shimmering robes that made them look like sulking shadows. Mira had always thought they resembled tall, moody teenagers who'd just discovered a Nietzsche phase. "Ah, the cultural critics have arrived," Jax muttered. "And here I was thinking they'd send flowers," Mira said. The Xel'Naga delegation was led by High Arbiter Zoltar, a name that seemed like it belonged to a fortune-teller at a carnival rather than the head of an alien bureaucracy. His smooth, expressionless face gave nothing away, a perfect poker facade that Mira found deeply unnerving. "Mira Kess," Zoltar intoned, voice reverberating as if he'd swallowed a subwoofer. "You are aware of the repercussions of your actions." "Which actions?" Mira asked, feigning ignorance with a touch of bravado. "This art thing, or the time I jaywalked on Main Street last Tuesday. Do not feign innocence." Zoltar's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, a micro-expression of annoyance. "Your art incites unrest among the populace, chaos, dissatisfaction. It poisons the minds." "I'd call it encouraging critical thinking, but sure, let's go with poison," Mira said. "And here I was worried nobody paid attention to art anymore. This is no laughing matter." Zoltar's tone was as cold as the vacuum outside. "The Xel'Naga Council has decreed that human art is to be outlawed, effective immediately." "Outlawing human art," Jax said, scratching his chin. "That's a bit of an overreaction, isn't it? What's next? Outlawing sarcasm." "I'm not sure their translators even work for sarcasm," Mira said. Zoltar's gaze shifted to Jax, his patience visibly thinning. "Human art is a catalyst for rebellion. The Council cannot allow such instability." "Instability?" Mira echoed. "Oh, come on, we've had stability for years, dull as hell but stable." "Maybe a little shaking up is exactly what we need." "And what you need is perspective," Zoltar replied. "Art must not be a weapon." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I thought the pen was mightier than the sword." "Guess we all learn something new every day." Zoltar turned his attention to the cube that held the last laugh. His expression remained inscrutable, but Mira fancied she saw a hint of curiosity beneath that stony exterior. "This is your latest work," he stated. "Yup," Mira said, popping the pea with deliberate nonchalance. "Hope you brought tissues in case it moves you to tears." Jax snorted. "That's one way to put it." Zoltar gestured, and one of his aides, a smaller, more nervous-looking Xel'Naga, approached the cube. With careful precision, they deactivated the containment field, revealing Mira's masterpiece in all its contraband glory. The crowd that had gathered, mostly human workers, gasped. The last laugh was a jarring juxtaposition of colors and shapes, a chaotic blend of the cosmic and the mundane. It spoke of rebellion, chaos, and the absurdity of existence under a regime that deemed it necessary to outlaw creativity. It was Mira's middle finger to the establishment, painted in vibrant hues. "This is madness," Zoltar said, more to himself than anyone else. "Madness," Mira parroted, grinning like a Cheshire cat with a secret. "No, Zoltar, this is art." Jax leaned in, whispering just loud enough for Mira to hear. "You think this is gonna end well?" "End well? Unlikely," Mira replied. "End spectacularly? Definitely." Zoltar looked at Mira, his eyes more analytical than before. "You leave us no choice but to take drastic measures." Mira shrugged, the very picture of defiance wrapped in indifference. Drastic. Now there's a word that's seen some action. Let me guess, you're gonna confiscate my paintbrushes. "Your insolence will not save you," Zoltar warned. "Insolence, that's just my charm," Mira winked. "Besides, humor's all we've got left when the universe turns its back." Zoltar gestured to his aides. "Prepare to seal the platform. No one leaves until this display is dismantled." "Nice of you to stay for the closing ceremony," Jax said. "Hope the refreshments are up to your standards." Mira watched as the Xel'Naga moved to encircle the last laugh, their intentions clear. She could almost hear the clinks of the metaphorical chains tightening around her future. Yet she couldn't help but admire their efficiency. If they ever decided to pivot to event planning, they'd have a side gig. "You know," Mira said, raising her voice to address the gathered workers and Xel'Naga alike, "for a species that prides itself on order, you seem pretty intent on chaos." "Order requires sacrifice," Zoltar replied, his voice echoing in the silence that followed. "Your art is a luxury we cannot afford." "Luxury?" Mira chuckled, a sound that cut through the tension like a knife. "Art is rebellion. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity, and it's not going anywhere even if I'm not around to make it." The crowd murmured, a ripple of unrest passing through them. Humans were a stubborn lot, and Mira knew they wouldn't take this lying down. As if sensing the shift, Zoltar's expression hardened and he motioned for his aides to begin the dismantling. Jax nudged Mira. "You got a plan, or are we winging it?" "Winging it, me." "Never," Mira replied, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I've got a contingency plan. Please tell me it doesn't involve jail time." "No promises," Mira said. "But hey, what's art without a little risk?" As the Xel'Naga began their task, Mira caught sight of the humans in the crowd exchanging glances, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something bigger. A ripple that could become a wave. "This isn't the end, Zoltar," Mira said, her voice firm and unyielding. "Art has a way of surviving. Even if you crush it here, it'll pop up somewhere else, like a resilient little weed." Zoltar paused, his gaze meeting hers. "Weeds are eradicated," Mira smirked. "Funny thing about weeds, they're nature's survivors. And so are we." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, the energy shifting, a defiant undercurrent building beneath the surface. Zoltar seemed to sense it too, his expression darkening as he realized that perhaps, just perhaps, they had underestimated the resilience of human spirit. And as Mira stood there, surrounded by the potential chaos she had unwittingly ignited, she felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Whatever happened next, it was sure to be interesting. Just as Zoltar opened his mouth to issue another command, the platform's emergency klaxons blared to life, a discordant symphony of alarms and flashing lights. Mira's heart leaped. Maybe, just maybe, this chaos was exactly the kind of art she'd been aiming for all along. Mira surveyed the chaos with the calm detachment of an artist watching her latest installation unravel. The Ascendia's top platform was a swirl of flashing lights, panicked shouts, and the unmistakable hum of bureaucratic overreach meeting human obstinance. It was beautiful, in a grim sort of way. "Well, That escalated quickly, Jack said, leaning against a support beam as if watching a particularly entertaining play. His casual posture belied the tension in his eyes. Who knew art appreciation could be so explosive? Mira replied, her voice carrying a touch of amused resignation. I blame the critics. The crowd, a mix of human workers and Xel'Naga enforcers, had the nervous energy of people who just realized they might be the extras in a disaster movie. The workers were exchanging glances, some defiant, others uncertain. The Xel'Naga, on the other hand, looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, preferably somewhere with less potential for a human uprising. Mira's art collective, The Thread, had started as a small group of misfits and rebels, united by a common disdain for the sanitized, soulless landscape the Xel'Naga had imposed. It had grown into something more, a symbol of resistance, a beacon for those who still believed in the power of a well-placed metaphor, and apparently a direct line to the heartstrings of an alien bureaucracy on the edge of an aneurysm. Did you really think they'd just let the last laugh stand? Jax asked, voice low, eyes scanning the crowd for signs of impending doom. Mira shrugged. Hope springs eternal, or so they say. Besides, it's not every day you get to piss off an entire species with a few brushstrokes. Jax chuckled, a sound that was more resigned than amused. You always had a knack for poking the bear, and now the bear's poking back. Mira nodded towards the Xel'Naga enforcers, who were converging on the platform with all the subtlety of a herd of elephants trying to tiptoe through a minefield. High Arbiter Zoltar, looking like a man who'd just been told his favorite planet had exploded, was in the middle of a heated argument with one of his aides. The conversation was a hushed flurry of aggravated gestures and pointed looks, the kind of discussion that usually ended with someone getting demoted. Think they are regretting their decision to outlaw art yet? Mira mused, eyeing the growing crowd of dissenters. We can only hope, Jax said, hands still casually stuffed in his pockets. But if there's one thing bureaucrats hate more than art, it's admitting they made a mistake. The Xel'Naga enforcers had formed a semicircle around the platform's edge, their weapons lowered but ready. They were like statues, tall, foreboding, and utterly lacking in any sense of humor. Mira briefly wondered if they'd ever tried stand-up comedy. Probably not. Do you think they realize that banning art only makes it more appealing? Mira asked, her voice carrying an edge of mischief. Jax snorted. Oh, definitely. It's like telling a kid not to push the big red button. Suddenly, that's the only thing they want to do. Mira turned her attention back to the crowd, the tension building to a fever pitch. The workers were restless, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. The thread was here, scattered among them, as subtle as a revolution could be when it was on the verge of boiling over. The Xel'Naga, for all their technological superiority, seemed to have missed the memo on how to handle a furious human. Their enforcers were shifting uncomfortably, glancing at each other with expressions that screamed, "Why us?" It was almost endearing in a watching a train wreck kind of way. Do you think they'll actually pull the trigger? Jax asked, nodding towards the Xel'Naga's weapons. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of 1,000 potential outcomes. Mira considered it, a smirk playing across her lips. Maybe. But that'd be a hell of a public relations nightmare. Aliens blast starving artists doesn't make for a good headline. Depends on the audience, Jax replied, dry as a Martian summer. Before Mira could respond, the tension snapped. A voice from the crowd shouted, "Down with the Xel'Naga." It was the spark in the powder keg, the match that lit the fuse. The workers erupted into a chorus of defiance, their voices rising in a wave of sound that crashed over the platform like a tidal wave. The Xel'Naga enforcers tensed, their weapons rising in a synchronized, menacing display. Mira could feel the electric charge in the air, the split second before chaos descended. "Well, here we go," Jax said, his voice barely audible over the noise. Mira nodded, the fire of rebellion burning bright in her eyes. "Just like old times, huh? Yeah, except this time we might actually win." The first shots were fired, not from the Xel'Naga but from the humans' makeshift weapons cobbled together from whatever they could find. It was a David and Goliath scenario, with the added complication of interstellar relations and a hefty dose of existential dread. Mira watched as the platform erupted into chaos, the workers rushing the Xel'Naga lines with a ferocity born of desperation. Her heart pounded in her chest, the thrill of the fight mingling with the fear of the unknown. "Think we can take them?" Jax asked, ducking as a stray energy blast whizzed past his ear. "Define take," Mira replied, grinning like a lunatic. "If you mean survive, then maybe." The Xel'Naga, for all their bluster, seemed taken aback by the sheer tenacity of their human opponents. The enforcers faltered, their tight formation breaking under the onslaught of bodies and improvised projectiles. It was a mess, a beautiful mess, and Mira loved every minute of it. "Remember, don't get cocky," Jax warned, his own voice laced with adrenaline. Mira shrugged. "When have I ever been cocky?" Jax gave her a look that spoke volumes, his disbelief almost tangible. "Do you really want me to answer that?" The battle raged on, a chaotic ballet of art and war, the lines between creator and destroyer blurring into one. The Xel'Naga, for all their might, had underestimated one crucial factor. The human spirit was a stubborn, indomitable thing. As the fight continued, Mira found herself caught up in the surge, the thrill of the rebellion intoxicating and irresistible. The thread was woven throughout the chaos, their presence a guiding light in the darkness of oppression. The platform shook with the force of the conflict, the structure groaning under the weight of the struggle. Mira spared a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all, an entire species reduced to this, a battle over the right to create, to express, to be. "This isn't just about art anymore," Jax said, his gaze locked on the shifting tides of battle. Mira nodded, her expression fierce and determined. "It's about everything: freedom, choice. The right to be a pain in the ass." Zoltar, caught in the maelstrom of sound and fury, looked like a man whose entire worldview was crumbling. His aides surrounded him, their expressions a mix of panic and frustration as their carefully constructed world began to fall apart. "Think you'll wise up and call it off?" Jax asked, hopeful but not optimistic. Mira shook her head. "Doubt it. Once they double down, they are in it for the long haul." The platform swayed, the battle reaching a fever pitch, the outcome uncertain. Mira felt a strange, fierce joy bubbling within her, an artist in the midst of creating her most dangerous masterpiece yet. "Whatever happens, Mira," Jax said, meeting her gaze with a mixture of admiration and exasperation, "I have to say, it's been one hell of a ride." Mira grinned, her heart soaring even as the world around her threatened to collapse. "And it's not over yet." The platform throbbed with energy, a living thing caught in the throes of transformation. The Xel'Naga enforcers, overwhelmed by the tide of humanity, began to fall back, their lines breaking like waves against the shore. "Looks like they are retreating," Jax said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Or regrouping," Mira countered, ever the realist. "Don't get too excited." As the Xel'Naga pulled back, Mira took a moment to catch her breath, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, a heady mix of fear and elation. This was it, the moment when everything teetered on the brink of change. The crowd, triumphant but wary, watched as the enforcers retreated, their defiance a tangible force in the air. Mira could feel it, the shift, the swell of possibility and hope that had been ignited by a single act of rebellion. "It's not over," Jax said, echoing her earlier sentiment. "No," Mira agreed, her voice steady and strong. "It's just beginning." As the dust settled and the chaos subsided, Mira stood at the heart of the storm, a reluctant hero in a tale of defiance and creativity. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain: the world would never be the same, and perhaps, just perhaps, that was the greatest masterpiece of all. The air on Ascendia's top platform was thick with tension, not the kind that makes you want to break out into a nervous sweat, but the kind that makes you want to punch the nearest Xel'Naga in their smug, superior face. The humans, buoyed by their small victory of forcing the alien enforcers back, were riding high on adrenaline and righteous fury. Meanwhile, Mira Kess stood amidst the chaos, savoring the sweet taste of rebellion like a fine wine. "Feels like we just kicked a hornet's nest," Jax said, eyeing the retreating Xel'Naga with a mix of satisfaction and wariness. "Only this time, the hornets have laser guns." Mira smirked, her gaze scanning the platform for any signs of regrouping from the Xel'Naga. "Yeah, but it turns out hornets aren't great with crowd control." As if in response, a shriek echoed through the crowd, not one of fear but of defiance. A young woman, her arms painted with the vibrant colors of the thread, climbed atop a crate and waved a makeshift flag. It was a patchwork of discarded fabric and stolen government banners, a symbol of unity and perhaps more importantly of flipping the metaphorical bird to their alien overlords. "Looks like we've got a new recruit," Jax noted, nodding towards the woman. Mira chuckled. "They'll never see it coming. Enforcers, meet arts and crafts." But it wasn't just arts and crafts asserting themselves that day. As word of the uprising spread like wildfire, more humans began to join the fray. The platform, a once orderly symbol of extraterrestrial achievement, was quickly devolving into something altogether more human, unpredictable and utterly chaotic. Amid the growing throng, a man with a cybernetic arm that looked like it might have been cobbled together from spare parts and bad ideas approached Mira and Jax. "Got some interesting intel," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial like a spy in a bad holodrama. "And who might you be?" Jax asked, one eyebrow raised in a skeptical arch. "Name's Bex," the man replied, his grin wide and slightly manic. "I'm with the Thread, heard you folks might be interested in a little structural vulnerability." Mira's interest piqued. "Structural vulnerability, eh? Sounds like my kind of art." "Turns out," Bex continued, "this fancy space elevator of theirs isn't as indestructible as they'd like to think. There's a weak point in the framework, right around where the power conduits converge. Hit that spot and this whole thing could come crashing down." Jax whistled softly, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Now that's what I call a design flaw," Beck shrugged, as if structural sabotage were a mundane topic of conversation. "What can I say? Aliens may have big brains, but they still haven't figured out duct tape." Mira's mind raced with possibilities. "So, we take out the conduits and what? Send the whole elevator crashing down on their heads?" Bex nodded. "Exactly. Though fair warning, it'd be catastrophic for everyone up here. But hey, desperate times and all that." Mira considered the chaos that would ensue, the potential loss of life. It was a hell of an option, one that could tip the scales in their favor or bury them under the rubble. "We'll keep it in our back pocket for now." Jax crossed his arms, looking thoughtful. "If we can get enough people on board, we might not need to bring the whole thing down. Just threaten to. Make them back off." Bex grinned, his enthusiasm infectious. "Now you're thinking like a revolutionary." As they plotted and schemed, the Xel'Naga weren't simply licking their wounds. Retreating was never part of their long-term strategy. No, they were regrouping, reassessing, and undoubtedly planning to come back swinging harder than an enraged space gorilla. High Arbiter Zolter still loomed as a figure of stammering indignation, trying to exert control amidst the unraveling situation. His voice, amplified through the platform speakers, crackled to life, dripping with poorly veiled irritation. "This insubordination will not be tolerated. Cease this madness and you will be treated mercifully." "Mercy? From them?" Jax snorted, shaking his head. "What does that even mean, a slightly less painful vaporization?" Mira rolled her eyes, addressing the unseen High Arbiter. "Zolter, darling, you couldn't find your own mercy with a map and a flashlight." The crowd responded with a roar of laughter and approval, their spirits bolstered by Mira's irreverence. In this war of words and wills, humor was perhaps their sharpest weapon. "Keep them riled up," Mira said to Jax, a mischievous glint in her eye. "The more they laugh, the harder they'll fight." "Good plan," Jax agreed before his expression turned serious. "But we're gonna need more than jokes to keep this going. What about supplies, weapons?" Bex nodded. Already thought of that. There's a depot 3 levels down, guarded but not heavily. If we can hit it, we could arm the whole platform. Mira raised an eyebrow. And how exactly do we get past the guards? Ask nicely and promise to send a thank you note. Bex grinned, revealing a set of slightly crooked teeth. Nah, but I do have access codes. Swiped him off an officer. It's amazing what a little distraction and sleight of hand can do. Stealing from the Zelnaga. I like your style, Jax said, clapping Bex on the back. Guess we'll need to organize a raiding party. Mira nodded. Let's get to it then. The longer we wait, the more time they have to reinforce. The plan to raid the supply depot was set into motion with the kind of quick efficiency that only desperation and caffeine could produce. Mira, Jax, and Bex, along with a ragtag group of volunteers from the Thread, made their way through the labyrinthine passages of Ascendia, their movements furtive yet determined. The depot loomed ahead, guarded by a handful of Zelnaga enforcers who looked less than thrilled to be stationed there, the kind of board that made you question your life choices and consider a career in accounting. All right, Bex, this is your show, Mira whispered, gesturing towards the guards. Ready to work your magic? Bex nodded, his fingers dancing over a control panel in his cybernetic arm. Watch and learn, he said, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. With a few deft movements, the lights in the corridor flickered, then plunged into darkness. A moment of confusion ensued, the guards fumbling in the night, muttering curses in a language that sounded suspiciously like a blender on the fritz. Move, Mira hissed, and their group sprang into action, slipping past the disoriented guards like shadows in the gloom. Inside the depot, they quickly began loading up on weapons and supplies, their movements efficient and focused. Jax hefted a particularly menacing-looking piece of tech, grinning. Now this is what I call retail therapy. As they worked, adding firepower to their ragtag arsenal, Mira couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. This was resistance in its purest form, resourceful, relentless, irreverent. It was everything the Zelnaga couldn't understand and everything that made humanity beautifully infuriating. Got what we need? Jax asked, slinging a pack over his shoulder. Yeah, Mira replied, nodding. Let's get this back to the others. The return to the platform was a tense affair, their progress shadowed by the constant threat of discovery. But fortune favored the foolish, or perhaps the bold, and they made it back unscathed. Once there, Mira addressed the gathered crowd, her voice carrying over the din of anticipation. All right, listen up. We've got weapons, we've got numbers, and we've got a platform full of angry humans who aren't afraid to fight for what's rightfully ours. The crowd responded with a cheer, their resolve steeled by Mira's words. But remember, she continued, this isn't just about fighting. It's about showing the Zelnaga that we're not just going to roll over and play dead. We're going to stand, we're going to resist, and we're going to make them regret ever thinking they could silence human creativity. Jack stepped forward, adding his voice to the rallying cry. And if they think they can push us around, then they've got another thing coming. The crowd's fervor was palpable, their defiance a living force that thrummed through the air. The thread had unwound its way into the hearts and minds of Ascendia's people, and there was no going back. Mira glanced at Jax, a silent understanding passing between them. They were in this together, for better or worse. And as the Zelnaga regrouped, preparing to launch their next assault, Mira knew that whatever the outcome, they wouldn't go down without a fight. Ready? Jax asked, his tone both hopeful and resigned. Born ready, Mira replied, her eyes alight with the fire of rebellion. As the platform vibrated with the anticipation of the coming battle, Mira felt a peculiar sense of calm. This was what they had been waiting for, the moment when they could stand tall and make their voices heard. The Zelnaga might have had the technology, the firepower, the overwhelming force. But they didn't have the one thing that made the humans truly dangerous, the audacity to dream, to create, to defy. And as the platform buzzed with the energy of 1,000 potentialities, Mira Kess knew that this was only the beginning. The Zelnaga were clearly getting desperate. Rumor had it High Arbiter Zoltar had called a meeting, presumably to stroke his ego and pretend he was still in charge of this mess. Back on the platform, their panic was palpable. They started broadcasting new threats that sounded like a legal disclaimer read by a lawyer who'd just realized he had no clients. All human occupants of Ascendia's upper platform are hereby warned. Further resistance will result in mass arrests and summary detainment, blared the voice of an alien who clearly hadn't had his morning coffee. Assuming they drank coffee, compliance will be rewarded with leniency. Leniency, Jack scoffed, shifting his laser rifle from one shoulder to the other. Yeah, sure, because nothing says lenient like a lifetime sentence on one of their delightfully dystopian prison worlds. Mira smirked, shouting back at the speaker, Zoltar, if you're offering a vacation, you might want to lead with no extradition and all-inclusive resort. Resort? Only if you like your beach chairs made of old bones, Bex chimed in, messing with the settings on his cybernetic arm. It whirred ominously, then clicked, almost like an old-world rotary phone. Nothing like beachfront property with a view of a death ray. The crowd chuckled, the tension in the air momentarily eased. It was dark humor, but it was their humor. Whatever else the Xel'Naga might take from them, they couldn't take that. As Zoltar's voice faded, replaced by the low thrum of nervous conversation, Mira pulled Jax and Bex aside. We need leverage, she said, her voice low. And I've got an idea. It's a little extreme, but since when have we shied away from extremes? Jax raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. We threatened to collapse the elevator. Bex blinked, his manic energy briefly subdued. You're serious. Dead serious, she replied, her expression unwavering. We don't actually have to do it. Just make them think we will. Jax nodded slowly. It's risky, but if they believe us, it could force them to back off, maybe even negotiate. Mira glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. Exactly. We make sure they know we can take the whole damn thing down if we want. Hit them where it hurts, their pride. Bex scratched the stubble on his chin with a metal finger. And if they call our bluff, Mira's smile was cold. Then we make sure they don't live long enough to gloat about it. The plan was ambitious and teetered on the edge of insanity, which Mira thought might just be why it would work. They had the element of unpredictability on their side. The Xel'Naga couldn't account for human madness. That's what made humans so dangerous. As they discussed the logistics of planting the threat, a figure slipped into the shadows, unseen by all but one. A pair of watchful eyes tracked the movement, suspicion growing like mold on a forgotten sandwich. Jax caught Mira's glance and nodded towards the lurking figure. We've got company. Mira frowned, her instincts screaming a warning. Let's keep this under wraps. We can't afford any leaks. Their conversation continued, but all the while, Mira's mind was spinning, gears clicking into place at a pace that would make an AI dizzy. She'd seen betrayal before, worn its scars like a badge of honor, and she had no intention of letting it catch her unawares again. The next few hours were a blur of preparation and paranoia. The thread operated with the frenetic energy of a hive under attack, each member driven by a shared purpose, survival. But as they worked, an undercurrent of tension simmered, threatening to boil over. It was during the makeshift briefing when Mira dropped the bombshell plan to the assembled group. We have a way to make them back off, she announced, voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at her gut. But it's going to take everyone working together. We need to convince the Xel'Naga that we can bring this entire platform crashing down. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd, but it was quickly drowned out by murmurs of agreement. Desperation was a powerful motivator, and they were knee-deep in it. Bex took the floor next, his confidence returning with a vengeance. We've got the tech to make this threat real. But we've also got a mole. That got everyone's attention. The room fell silent, eyes shifting nervously, each person judging their neighbor with newfound suspicion. We don't know who, Bex continued, but someone's been feeding info to the Xel'Naga. We need to smoke them out. Great, Jax muttered, crossing his arms. As if we didn't have enough problems. Mira nodded, her mind already formulating a plan. Okay then, We set a trap, feed some false intel, see who bites. Sounds risky, said a voice from the back. Everything we do is risky, Mira countered. But it's a risk we need to take. With a plan in place, the meeting broke up, the group dispersing into their respective tasks. Mira watched them go, her mind heavy with the weight of responsibility. If they succeeded, it would be a victory for humanity, a statement that they were not to be trifled with. If they failed, well, there wouldn't be much left to worry about. As the makeshift band of revolutionaries went about their business, Mira gathered her closest allies. Bex, with his penchant for mischief and skill with tech. Jax, for his steady hand and sharp mind. Together, they were a formidable trio, each bringing something unique to the table. Mira, Bex said, his voice low. You really think this can work? Mira met his gaze, her expression resolute. I don't know, she admitted, but we've got to try. The next phase of their plan required finesse. They needed to feed their traitor just enough information to gauge their reaction without tipping them off. A delicate balance, like juggling grenades with the pins pulled. As the day wore on, the tension in the air thickened, a miasma of fear and determination that hung over the platform like an uninvited guest. The Xel'Naga were regrouping, their presence more oppressive with every passing Ior. It was during this oppressive twilight that Mira received word. Their mole had taken the bait. Looks like we've got a nibble, Bex said, his grin wolfish. Now we just need to reel them in. Mira nodded, her pulse quickening. Any idea who? Not yet, Bex replied, but we're close. Give me a little more time and I'll have something concrete. Their conversation was interrupted by a crash, the sound echoing through the corridors like a gunshot. Mira and Jax exchanged a look, both thinking the same thing, trouble. They rushed towards the source of the noise, Mira's heart pounding in time with her footsteps. What they found was chaos. The ragtag remnants of the thread had been ambushed, their supplies scattered across the floor. Amidst the wreckage stood a familiar face. It was one of their own, someone Mira had trusted, someone she thought she knew. Lena, Mira said, disbelief laced with anger. Why? Lena shrugged, her expression unreadable. Survival, Mira, you should know that better than anyone. You sold us out, Jax accused, his voice cold. Had to, Lena replied, her eyes hard. The Xel'Naga offered me a deal, I take it or they take me. Mira shook her head, disappointment warring with fury. You think they'll keep their word? You're just as expendable to them as we are. Lena's laugh was bitter. Maybe, but at least I bought myself some time. The confrontation was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps, Xel'Naga reinforcements, drawn by the commotion. They had to move, and fast. Mira made a split-second decision. We're leaving, she said, grabbing Jax's arm. Now. They retreated, leaving behind the shattered remains of their supplies and what little trust they had left in Lena. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that someone they'd fought alongside had turned against them. As they regrouped, the reality of their situation hit home. They were on borrowed time. With the Xel'Naga breathing down their necks and one of their own turned traitor, their chances of pulling off their plan were slimmer than ever. But Mira wasn't ready to give up. Not now, not ever. They'd come too far to back down, and if the Xel'Naga thought they could win through deception and betrayal, then they didn't know what they were dealing with. The humans were down, but they weren't out. And as long as they had breath left in their bodies, they'd keep fighting. That's the thing about humans. They may be flawed, messy, and far too prone to violence for their own good, but they were also stubborn as hell. And that stubbornness, well, it just might be their saving grace. The dimly lit corridor seemed to stretch on forever, which was a hell of a lot longer than Mira figured she had left. She could hear the clanking footsteps of the Xel'Naga patrol echoing behind her, each step a countdown to her inevitable capture. Running was not exactly her forte. She preferred standing her ground, maybe with a nice verbal jab or two, but desperate times and all that. Mira, you still with us? Jax's voice crackled through the calm in her ear, sounding far calmer than she felt. Just about, she shot back, ducking into a side room that smelled faintly of something she didn't want to identify. Where's the cavalry when you need it? Bex's voice chimed in, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "About that, we're a bit short on white horses and shining armor today. But I've got a cybernetic arm that makes a mean cup of coffee. Not sure caffeine's gonna help against laser rifles, Bex," she replied, peering through a crack in the door. The Zelnaga patrol was getting closer, their guttural language rolling down the hall like a particularly unpleasant thunderstorm. "Hey, don't knock it till you've tried it," Bex quipped. "Caffeine's gotten me through a lot of tight spots. Save the coffee for the after-party," Jax cut in, all business. "Mira, you need to find an exit. We can't lose you now." "Working on it," she muttered, scanning the room for anything that could serve as a weapon, or at least a decent distraction. Her eyes landed on a rusty pipe, half detached from the crumbling wall. Not ideal, but it'd have to do. As she wriggled the pipe free, Mira couldn't help but think of the irony. Here she was, leader of a fledgling rebellion, reduced to playing hide-and-seek with a bunch of overgrown lizards. It was almost laughable if it weren't so damn serious. "Got myself a new toy," she said, hefting the pipe experimentally. "How are things looking on your end?" "Not great," Jax admitted. "Space elevators starting to collapse." "Looks like your little bluff wasn't as much of a bluff as we thought." "Fantastic," Mira deadpanned. "Nothing like a good old-fashioned apocalypse to get the blood pumping." The Zelnaga were nearly upon her, their shadows flickering against the walls like looming specters. She had seconds before they found her, and she wasn't keen on what came after. Negotiating with a pipe wasn't exactly her idea of diplomacy, but it was better than surrender. "All right, folks," she whispered, steeling herself. "Time for a little impromptu performance." The door crashed open, and Mira sprang forward, pipe swinging with all the elegance of a brick through a window. The first Zelnaga went down with a surprised grunt, though Mira doubted she'd done more than bruise its pride. The second one, however, had its laser aimed squarely at her chest. "Gotcha, you slimy bastard," she muttered, dodging to the side just as the shot seared past her, leaving a smoking hole in the wall. "Mira, you need to move," Jax's voice urged, sharper now. "You've got company coming from all sides." "No kidding," she grunted, ducking another blast. "Could use a little backup here." "We're working on it," Bex said, and she could hear the sound of frantic typing in the background. "Just hang tight." Hanging tight was not on Mira's agenda. She swung the pipe again, catching the Zelnaga in the side, more out of desperation than skill. It hissed, staggered back, and she took the opening, bolting past them into the hallway. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but the thought of what awaited her if she stopped kept her moving. She could hear the space elevator groaning, metal twisting under stress. The whole damn thing was coming apart at the seams, and if she didn't find a way out soon, she'd be buried in a pile of humanity's failed ambitions. "Elevator's not looking too stable, Mira," Bex commented. A bit obvious, but she let it slide. "We're monitoring from here. Got a spot you can reach." "Working on it," she panted, glancing down the corridor. There was an emergency hatch up ahead if she could just make it. Another patrol rounded the corner, and Mira cursed under her breath. "Looks like I've got a welcoming committee." "Any chance of a distraction?" "We're on it," Jax replied, and a moment later a series of small explosions rippled down the corridor behind her, the lights flickering madly. "Nice work," she said, skidding to a halt beside the hatch. "You do birthday parties too?" "Only if you like your cake served with a side of shrapnel," Jax shot back, and she could hear the smirk in his voice. The hatch was rusted shut, of course, because why would anything be easy? Mira yanked on the wheel, gritting her teeth as it refused to budge. The sound of approaching Zelnaga spurred her on, adrenaline lending her strength. With a final, desperate wrench, the wheel turned and the hatch swung open. "All right," she breathed, peering into the black void below. "Guess we're taking the express route." "Mira, wait," Bex started, but she didn't have time to listen. The Zelnaga were too close, and she had no intention of letting them catch up. She jumped, the world blurring around her as she fell. The chute was dark, the air rushing past her like the whisper of death itself. She hit the ground hard, the impact sending shockwaves through her body. For a moment she lay there stunned, the wind knocked out of her. Well, that was fun, she wheezed, dragging herself to her feet. Her body protested, but she ignored it. Pain was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Mira, you okay? Jax's voice was edged with concern, though he did a good job of masking it with casual indifference. Peachy, she replied, wincing as she checked for broken bones. Though I could use a drink. Hang tight. We're closing in on your location, Bex said, the clacking of keys a constant backdrop. Try not to get shot before we get there. I'll do my best, she muttered, glancing around. The lower level was a maze of forgotten machinery and dimly lit passages, the perfect setting for a last stand if one was inclined to romanticize their impending doom. She wasn't. Her eyes caught a sliver of light in the distance, a way out maybe if she was lucky, but luck had never been her strong suit. The ground shook, a deep rumble reverberating through the structure. The space elevator was failing, inching closer to total collapse with every passing second. Elevator's not gonna hold much longer, Jax warned. You need to move. Yeah, she said, hobbling forward. Working on it. The light was closer now, almost within reach, but she could hear the Xel'Naga closing in, their guttural commands echoing through the halls. Mira, we're almost there. Bex's voice was tense, urgency crackling through the comm. Just hang on. Hanging on sounded like a good plan if she had anything left to hang on to. She could feel herself flagging, the adrenaline wearing thin. But she pressed on, driven by stubbornness if nothing else. The exit was in sight, a sliver of hope in a collapsing world. The final stretch felt like an eternity, but she made it, bursting through the door and into the open air. The cold bite of the wind was a welcome shock, bringing her senses back into focus. And there they were, Jax and Bex, rushing towards her with a speed born of desperation. She staggered towards them, relief a tangible weight lifting off her shoulders. Well, isn't this a touching reunion, she panted, managing a grin despite the circumstances. Where's my medal? Jax laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. We'll get you a nice participation ribbon. Bex smirked, his cybernetic arm whirring as he adjusted something on the fly. Let's get you out of here before the whole place comes down. They were moving, the three of them, racing against time and the inevitable collapse of the elevator. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a constant reminder of their precarious situation. As they stumbled onward, Mira couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They'd faced long odds before, and somehow they'd always managed to come out the other side. But this time felt different. The rebellion was fractured, their allies scattered, and the Xel'Naga still held the upper hand. It was going to take everything they had to turn the tide. Mira, Bex said, drawing her out of her thoughts. We've got a plan. It's risky, but it might just work. Risky plans are our specialty, she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Lay it on me. We're going to take down the elevator for real, Jax explained, his tone grim. Hit them where it hurts. It'll be a hell of a blow to their pride. Mira nodded, the pieces falling into place. And if we take the elevator down, we cut off their supply line. Exactly, Bex said, his grin fierce. We might just have a shot at turning this thing around. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. And if there was one thing Mira had learned, it was that even the longest shots could pay off, if you were willing to take the risk. With renewed determination they pressed on, weaving through the rubble and chaos. The space elevator loomed above them, a monument to human ambition and folly. But it was also their last best hope of salvation. As they moved, Mira's mind raced, plotting their next move. They'd need to coordinate with what was left of the thread, rally their forces, and strike hard and fast. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth fighting for ever was. In the distance, the Xel'Naga regrouped, their forces massing for one final push. The odds were stacked against the humans, but Mira wouldn't have it any other way. Ready for one last dance? She asked, her voice laced with dark humor. Jax shrugged, his expression one of grim determination. Wouldn't miss it. Bex flexed his cybernetic arm, the gears clicking into place. Let's give him hell. With that, they surged forward, ready to face whatever came next. Hope was a flickering flame, fragile yet enduring, and as long as it burned, there was a chance. Mira was determined to see it through, to fight until the bitter end, because that's what humans did. They fought, they endured, and they survived. And if the Xel'Naga wanted a war, they'd damn well get one. Mira's idea of a narrow escape involved a bit more breathing room and a lot less crashing into the back of an alien enemy. But life, with its consistent knack for lousy timing, decided otherwise. She and her ragtag crew had just managed a break for freedom, racing against the inevitable collapse of the space elevator. The wind whipped around them like a rabid beast, and the landscape of Ascendia blurred past in a dizzying rush. As they ran, something, or rather, someone, appeared in their path. Mira's legs failed to stop in time, and she collided head-on with a Xel'Naga. "Well, if it isn't a walking calamity," Vex remarked, his cybernetic arm pointing at the tangled heap that was Mira and the alien. "Fancy meeting you here." The Xel'Naga, who sported a distinctive battle-scarred face, groaned and disentangled itself from Mira. "I could say the same about you humans," it grumbled, rubbing its forehead where Mira's skull had made contact. "Always showing up when least wanted." "Vex." Mira blinked in recognition, struggling to her feet. This particular Xel'Naga was supposed to be an enemy, but life had pulled stranger cards before. "What are you doing here? Collecting frequent rescuer miles?" Vex, once a high-ranking enforcer, now seemed more like a disgruntled office worker forced to pick up a shift on their day off. "The usual," Vex replied, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Trying not to die in a collapsing structure." "You, same," Mira panted, trying to ignore the tremors of the failing elevator. "You alone, for now," Vex said, glancing around. "But not for long if we don't get moving." Jax and Bex exchanged wary glances, but Mira nodded. Her knack for reading people or aliens told her Vex was on the level, or maybe she was just desperate enough to take a chance. "All right, team," she said. "Welcome our new temporary ally. Vex, this is Jax and Bex. Pleasure's all mine," Vex replied dryly, scanning the horizon for any signs of their mutual enemies. "We need a plan," Jax cut in, ever the pragmatic one. "This elevator's going down faster than my last relationship," Bex snorted. "You mean the one that lasted as long as a Xel'Naga ceasefire?" Vex's lips twisted in what might have been a smile. "Charming," it said. "But if you want to avoid becoming a footnote in a history nobody will bother to write, I suggest we stabilize the elevator first." Mira raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do we do that? I left my engineering degree in my other jumpsuit." Vex shrugged, a surprisingly human gesture. "Lucky for you, I've got connections that might just help. Consider it my payback for that time you humans ruined my last holiday." "Holiday?" Bex asked incredulously. "You mean when we blew up your supply depot?" "Yeah," Vex grinned, a sight that was more terrifying than reassuring. "That." Mira felt a renewed sense of purpose fill her. It was a long shot involving a precarious truce with a former foe, but as she had learned, long shots were their specialty. "Okay," Mira decided. "Let's do it. But if anyone asks, this was your idea." The team set off, their destination a maintenance hub that Vex claimed still had functional manual controls. If they could hijack it, they could stabilize the structure enough to buy time for their final stand. The journey was fraught with the usual perils. Xel'Naga patrols, debris that seemed intent on playing whack-a-human, and the occasional misleading sign that promised salvation was just down the hall. But Vex proved a competent guide, steering them clear of most immediate dangers with an ease that suggested a deep familiarity with Ascendia's layout. "So, Vex," Jax asked as they darted through a particularly grimy corridor, "why the sudden change of heart? Decide you liked our charming personalities after all?" Vex chuckled, a sound like gravel caught in a blender. "Let's just say I'm tired of taking orders from someone with more ego than brains. Zolter's running the show like it's his personal soap opera." "Thought it was time for a plot twist." "Can't blame you there," Mira said, sidestepping a piece of broken conduit. "We've got enough drama on our side as it is." "Not to mention better hair," Bex added, brushing imaginary dust from his cybernetic limb. Seriously, have you seen the High Arbiter's hairline? It's receding faster than this elevator. Eventually, they reached the maintenance hub, a room that was less state-of-the-art technology and more abandoned breaker box. The smell of ozone and burnt wiring was enough to make Mira reconsider her life choices. Again, here we are, Vex announced, gesturing to the control console. Now, who wants to play engineer? Bex, being the tech aficionado, stepped forward. If this thing can handle my arm's coffee-making protocol, I'm in. With a few deft keystrokes and a muttered curse or two, Bex brought the system to life. The screens flickered to reveal a map of the elevator's infrastructure, most of it flashing ominous red warnings. Looks like a Christmas tree from hell, Jax observed, peering over Bex's shoulder. And just as likely to catch fire, Mira added. Can we stabilize it? Bex nodded, fingers flying over the keys. I can reroute power to the main supports. It'll hold, but not for long. We better make this quick. Right, Mira said, turning to Vex. Any suggestions on how we sell this to our side? I trust the Xel'Naga with the plan will go over well. Vex's eyes gleamed with a mischievous light. Leave that to me. I've got a few friends who owe me favors. They'll vouch for us. Mira didn't miss the us and found herself oddly reassured by it. It wasn't every day you found common ground with an alien enforcer, but desperate times and all that. Then let's make some calls, Jack suggested, his comm already in hand. I'll start rallying what's left of the thread. We need every warm body we can trust. As Jax worked his magic, Mira couldn't help but reflect on the bizarre turn of events. Here they were, planning a last stand with the help of someone who should logically be gunning for them. But logic had taken a backseat a long time ago, around the time the Xel'Naga had decided art was more dangerous than alcohol. Who knew? Maybe they were right. Maybe art was the weapon that could cut through the sanitized landscape the aliens imposed. Maybe the last laugh had been more than just a defiant gesture. It had been a call to arms. Okay, Jax interrupted her thoughts, his expression grim yet determined. We've got people coming. They'll need direction once they arrive. Got it, Mira replied, the weight of leadership settling back on her shoulders like an old, familiar coat. We'll give them something to fight for. The minutes ticked by, marked by the hum of machinery and the ever-present tremors of the failing elevator. The suspense was almost tangible, a living thing that wrapped around them like a shroud. And then, footsteps. Dozens of them, echoing through the corridors as the remnants of the thread began to arrive. They were a motley crew, human and alien alike, drawn together by a shared sense of defiance. All right, folks, Mira addressed them, projecting strength she wasn't entirely sure she felt. Here's the deal. We're going to hit the Xel'Naga where it hurts, stabilize this elevator, and give them something to think about other than where to stick their next art ban. The response was a murmur of assent, undercut by wary glances at Vex. Trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered and hard to rebuild. Vex here, Mira continued, is on our side, for now at least. If anyone's got a problem with that, take it up with me. No one spoke, but the looks exchanged were enough to say what words didn't. They knew the stakes, understood the need for unity, however temporary. Okay, Mira said, nodding. Let's do this. Jax, Bex, you take the left flank. Vex and I will cover the right. We move fast, hit hard, and pray like hell this works. The plan was simple, which was fortunate because complexity was not their friend at the moment. The group split, each team taking its position as they prepared for the final push. As they moved into place, Vex leaned in close to Mira, its voice low and sardonic. You know, if this fails, I'm going to haunt you. Mira snorted, feeling a grim camaraderie with the alien. Get in line. The battle that followed was a blur of motion and noise, a chaotic dance of life and death. The Xel'Naga fought with their usual penchant for overkill, but the humans pressed on, fueled by the knowledge that this was, quite possibly, their last stand. Mira found herself side by side with Vex more than once, their movements synchronized in a way that was nothing short of miraculous considering their history. It was like watching a buddy cop duo where the buddies wanted to kill each other half the time. But somehow, it worked. The Xel'Naga were forced back, their lines crumbling under the weight of human tenacity and a few strategically placed explosive charges. The maintenance hub held, Bex's modifications keeping the elevator steady if only temporarily. It was enough to turn the tide to give them a fighting chance. When the dust settled, the group regrouped, breathless but alive. The Xel'Naga had retreated, their forces regrouping for what would likely be a final, desperate assault. "Well," Bex said, wiping sweat from his brow, "that was invigorating. Anyone else feel like they just ran a marathon through a war zone?" "I'll pass on the next race," Jax replied, wincing as he adjusted his laser rifle. "My legs are suing for overtime." Vex, surprisingly, looked thoughtful. "You humans are a persistent bunch," it said, not unkindly. "Remind me to stay on your good side." Mira couldn't help but grin, despite the exhaustion that weighed her down. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. "All right," she said, addressing the group. "We've bought ourselves some time. Let's make the most of it." It wasn't a rousing speech, but it didn't need to be. The people around her were motivated by more than words. They had seen the possibility of change, however fleeting, and they were determined to seize it. As they regrouped, Mira felt that flicker of hope again, burning brighter than before. She knew better than to trust it entirely. Hope was a double-edged sword, after all. But she couldn't bring herself to snuff it out, because in the end they were still here, still fighting, still defying the odds. And for Mira, for the strange family she had found in the chaos, that was enough. The Xel'Naga command center loomed ahead, a monolithic testament to bad taste and worse intentions. It was the kind of place where architects had clearly been told, "Make it look menacing," and had run with the brief like a sprinter fleeing a tax auditor. The building was all jagged angles and ominous red lighting, a structure designed to scream, "Keep out, unless you've got a death wish." Mira stood at the edge of a shadowy alley, surveying the scene with the kind of grim determination that usually preceded either a heroic triumph or a spectacular disaster. Given their luck, she was betting on both. Beside her, Vex shifted its weight, the alien's presence a peculiar comfort in this strange alliance of necessity. "So," Mira said, glancing at Vex, "what's your plan for knocking on their front door? Ring the bell and run." Vex's laugh was as dry as a desert in a drought. "Something like that. We create a distraction, slip inside, and hit them where it hurts. And if that fails, we improvise." "Improvise?" Bex echoed, checking the charge on his cybernetic arm, which now doubled as a makeshift taser. "That's what got us into this mess in the first place." "Hey, if it ain't broke," Jax chimed in, adjusting his laser rifle with a practiced ease that belied his nerves. "Besides, what's life without a little chaos? I've got a reputation to maintain." Mira rolled her eyes, but couldn't deny the thrill that coursed through her veins. It was the same feeling she got before every reckless endeavor, the sense that she was on the brink of something monumental or catastrophically stupid. Sometimes both. "All right," she said, addressing the ragtag group that had assembled behind her. Humans and aliens, rebels and former enforcers, all united by a single goal: topple the Xel'Naga's stranglehold on Ascendia. We go in fast and loud, hit them with everything we've got. And remember, it's not just about taking down the command center, it's about what comes after. "What comes after?" Bex asked, eyebrow raised. "Freedom," Mira replied, her voice steady despite the chaos brewing inside her. "Or as close as we can get to it under the circumstances." With a nod from Vex, they moved, their steps synchronized in a way that only desperation and shared intent could achieve. The Xel'Naga patrols were sparse but vigilant, their guttural language echoing through the air like a chorus of broken machines. The first shots rang out, a cacophony of chaos that shattered the tense silence. Mira and Vex ducked and weaved through the barrage, their movements a dance of survival as they fought their way to the command center's entrance. It was Bex who breached the door, his cybernetic arm sparking as it interfaced with the lock. "Open sesame," he muttered, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his features as the door slid open. Inside, the command center was as sterile and unwelcoming as the exterior suggested. Consoles blinked with alien symbols, the air thick with the hum of machinery and the faint, unsettling scent of ozone. "Cozy," Jax quipped, his voice laced with sarcasm as they poured into the room. "Just needs a bit of feng shui." "Less talk, more action," Mira snapped, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of resistance. The Xel'Naga were caught off guard, their usual penchant for overkill hampered by the suddenness of the attack. It was a rare, fleeting advantage, one they intended to exploit to its fullest. As the fighting intensified, Mira felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. The rebellion, the hope, the sheer audacity of challenging an empire that had ruled with an iron fist for so long. But as she caught sight of the thread emblazoned on a nearby wall, an art piece that had somehow survived the censor's gaze, she felt a spark of inspiration. "Everyone, focus fire on the art installations," she shouted, her voice cutting through the din. "Let's remind them what they are really afraid of." The order was met with confusion, but also a growing sense of resolve. They targeted the installations, each piece a symbol of defiance, a reminder that the Xel'Naga's true enemy was not the resistance itself, but the spirit that fueled it. As the art crumbled under the onslaught, a strange thing happened. The Xel'Naga faltered, their focus wavering as if the destruction of these symbols was more than they could bear. "You've got to be kidding me," Bex breathed, watching as the aliens retreated, their confidence shattered. "They're actually afraid of our finger paintings." "Apparently so," Mira replied, her grin as sharp as a blade. "Guess they didn't read the fine print on cultural assimilation." With a final push, they claimed the command center, the remnants of the Xel'Naga forces scattering like leaves in a storm. The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a charged silence, a moment suspended in time, the calm before whatever storm awaited them next. As they regrouped, Mira couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck a blow that echoed through the ranks of their oppressors. But victory was a fickle thing, and Mira knew better than to trust it blindly. They had won a battle, not the war, and there was still much to be done. "All right," she said, addressing the group with a newfound authority that felt both foreign and entirely natural. "We've taken the command center, but this is just the beginning. We use this moment to rally, to show Ascendia that the Xel'Naga aren't invincible." The response was a chorus of agreement, tempered by exhaustion but fueled by hope. It was a fragile thing, hope, but it was theirs and they would protect it fiercely. As they began to strategize their next move, Mira felt a presence beside her. Vex, silent and inscrutable, its eyes reflecting a glimmer of something that might have been respect. "You did well," it said, the words heavy with an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared triumph. "We did well," Mira corrected, meeting its gaze with a nod. "And we'll keep doing well, as long as we remember what we're fighting for." The alien nodded, its expression unreadable but somehow more human than Mira would have ever believed possible. It was a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the universe, there were allies to be found, bridges to be built across chasms of distrust. As the plans took shape, Mira allowed herself a moment to breathe, to savor the small victory they had clawed from the jaws of defeat. It was a dangerous indulgence, but one she felt she had earned. "Hey, Mira," Jax called out, breaking her reverie. "Think we'll make it out of this in one piece?" Mira considered the question, her gaze sweeping over the motley crew that had become her family in this fight. The answer was uncertain, as all things were in the chaos of rebellion. But in that moment, she chose to embrace the uncertainty with the same reckless abandon that had brought her here. "Who knows, Jax," she replied with a wry smile. "But we've got art on our side. And if that's not enough to scare them off, I don't know what is." The laughter that followed was a balm against the darkness, a reminder that even in the bleakest of times, there was light to be found. They would face whatever came next with open eyes and stubborn hearts, united by the belief that some things were worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Mira stood on the precipice of the broken world they'd inherited, staring at the remains of Ascendia's landscape, which now resembled a piece of abstract art itself, splintered, chaotic, and decidedly not to the Xel'Naga's taste. The command center was theirs, but the real work was just beginning. She turned to the others, her motley crew of rebels, artists, and the occasional confused passerby who'd gotten caught up in the revolution and decided to stick around for the entertainment value. "Well," Mira said, surveying the ragged group with what passed for affection around these parts, "we've got the keys to the kingdom, but I'm fresh out of crowns and cozy thrones." Jax, ever the optimist, leaned against a wall that was more scorch-marked than structure. "I say we aim for organized chaos. It's been working so far." Bex's cybernetic arm whirred as he crossed them, smirking. Organized chaos. "Isn't that an oxymoron? It's just more interesting that way," Jax shot back. "Besides, who wants a peaceful utopia when you can have unpredictable mayhem?" Vex, their alien ally who'd somehow become part of the furniture without anyone quite noticing, nodded. "The unpredictability is a strength. The Xel'Naga never could handle spontaneity." The mention of their former oppressors brought a fresh wave of determination. Mira knew this was only the beginning of a transition that could either end in greatness or, more likely, glorious failure. "First things first," Mira said, clapping her hands in a way that was as much for her benefit as theirs. "We need to get the space elevator up and running again. The same elevator they used to ship us off to detention centers and worse," Bex asked, eyebrow raised. "Exactly," Mira confirmed. "Why not turn their tool of oppression into a symbol of our new reign of terror? The kind of terror where people are free to make bad art and questionable life choices." Jax grinned. "Precisely," Mira replied. "Plus, I've always wanted to see if we can make it into the universe's first vertical nightclub." Their laughter was the kind that bubbled up in unexpected places, lightening the mood but never fully unclenching the tightness of past trauma. It was a start, though, and for now, that would have to do. The team dispersed, each taking charge of a section of the city that was in desperate need of a facelift, unless you liked your cities looking like a war zone that just had a run-in with a particularly aggressive interior decorator. Mira found herself at what remained of the local art commune, a place that had once been vibrant with colors and ideas, before the Xel'Naga had decided that vibrant was another word for dangerous. The thread hung proudly on one of the less damaged walls, a testament to resilience so blatant it was almost embarrassing. She stood there contemplating the piece's twisting lines and bold strokes when an unexpected voice broke her reverie. "You know, it's ironic," said High Arbiter Zolter, who had somehow survived the chaos and now stood, cowed but curious, at her side. "Irony? From you?" Mira chuckled, not unkindly. "Haven't you had quite enough of that on your end?" "I suppose so." Zolter's arrogance had deflated like a balloon at a child's party, leaving him more relatable but still distinctly pitiful. "But truly, your art, it's your strength, isn't it?" Mira shrugged, trying to seem nonchalant. "It's something the Xel'Naga could never understand. Art is supposed to provoke, to inspire, even to infuriate. You guys took everything way too literally." "Literalism was our downfall," Zolter admitted, and Mira almost felt sorry for him. Almost, but not quite. "Well, you're in luck," Mira said, giving him a pat on the back that was just shy of patronizing. "Stick around, and you just might learn how to loosen up." Zolter gave a nod that was probably the alien equivalent of a smile, and Mira wondered what he might contribute if given the chance. A new society could use a bit of everything, even if it came from former enemies now turned reluctant allies. Meanwhile, the space elevator project was underway. Bex had commandeered a crew of eager, if inexperienced, volunteers who were busy at work transforming it from a symbol of oppression into something that could lift spirits as well as people. Vex took charge of logistics, coordinating efforts with a precision that could only come from its alien sensibilities. "We must ensure this structure becomes a beacon of hope," it instructed, managing to sound both commanding and mildly disdainful of the human's tendency to wing it. "And if that doesn't work, it can always double as the world's tallest art gallery," Jack suggested, earning a few chuckles and more than a few groans. As the elevator's new purpose began to take shape, Mira turned her attention to the cultural aspect of their revival. She knew that true freedom wasn't just about physical liberation, but also the ability to express oneself without fear of censorship or punishment. So she gathered the artists, the dreamers, and even those who had never picked up a brush or a pen in their lives but were now suddenly inspired to try. "Listen up, everyone," she called, waving them to silence. "This is our chance to make Ascendia something worth fighting for, not just a place to survive." A murmur of agreement spread through the group. "We'll hold exhibitions, performances, whatever you want," Mira continued. "Let's show the universe that we are more than the people the Xel'Naga tried to suppress." "Even if it's terrible?" someone dared to ask. "Especially if it's terrible," Mira replied with a grin. "Bad art is just as important as the good stuff, maybe more so." The meeting dissolved into plans and ideas, the kind of passion-fueled discussions that could easily devolve into arguments but didn't, because everyone understood what was at stake. In the days that followed, Ascendia slowly transformed from a battlefield to a canvas. The streets filled with art installations, some beautiful, some bewildering, all of them symbols of the newfound freedom that had been so hard-won. The space elevator, once an emblem of oppression, gleamed with new purpose. Its towering structure was adorned with murals and lights, a beacon visible for miles, announcing to all who cared to look that Ascendia was alive, kicking, and ready to take on whatever the universe had to throw at it next. Mira watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and disbelief. They'd done it. Not alone, not without loss or scar, but they'd done it. "You know," Jack said, coming up beside her, "I never really thought we'd get this far." "Neither did I," Mira confessed, looking out over the bustling activity that was proof of their success. "But here we are, Ascendia, the universe's newest hub of chaos and creativity. Think it'll last?" he asked, ever the skeptic. "Maybe," Mira replied. "Maybe not. But we'll give it one hell of a shot." And in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon and lights from the space elevator flickered to life, casting a soft glow over the city, Mira allowed herself to hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope, as she well knew, but it was also beautiful in its own messy, unpredictable way. Just like art, just like life, and just like the people of Ascendia. As the evening wore on and the city's new heartbeat pulsed with the rhythm of creation, Mira turned to Vex, who stood quietly taking it all in. "So," she said, nudging the alien with a grin, "what do you think of our little experiment in anarchy?" Vex's eyes shimmered with a rare warmth. "It's inspiring. You humans have a resilience that defies logic." High praise coming from a former enemy, Mira noted, surprised by the genuine emotion in Vex's voice. "Former, yes," Vex acknowledged, "but also an ally, and perhaps a friend." "Friend it is," Mira agreed, extending a hand which Vex took with a grace that belied its alien form. They stood there side by side, looking out over the city that was theirs to rebuild, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Mira felt a sense of peace. It wouldn't last, of course. Nothing ever did. But for now it was enough. A fragile, beautiful thing that was theirs to nurture, to protect, to create anew. In Ascendia, they'd found the strength to defy the odds, to overcome their differences, and to become something greater than the sum of their parts. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to change the world.